How did this New York startup ecology begin to emerge, and what do you see as some key factors, or maybe some key dates, or some key occurrences in that evolution?
Well, I think it's Tim Berners-Lee inventing the World Wide Web. I think that's really the moment. And my partner Brad says that the World Wide Web has caused a shift from electrical engineering to social engineering, and that's really what has driven it. And I also think that there's something about uh, the engineer. You think about Wozniak and you think about Zuckerberg. Wozniak he built computers. He was a chip guy,
Yep.
right? And Zuckerberg is a coder. And those are two very different animals. 5 or 6 years ago, I went to visit a guy named Rob Kalin. He founded a website called Etsy, and I went to see him, and he had this really awesome office overlooking the New York Harbor. And I walked into his office, and he was playing his guitar. And he sang me a song, and I said, Rob, I said, I didn't know that you were such a talented musician. And he said, Fred, I'm really an artist. He said, if I had grown up in the 60s, I would have been a folk musician. And if I'd grown up in the 20s, I'd been a painter. But I grew up in this generation, and my art is making websites. And I think that's what you have to understand, is that this is more art than it is science. And artists, I think, for the most part, congregate in cities.
But for all of us who bemoan gritty, me, when I would come here when I was 15 to drink cheap beer and listen to great music, who bemoan the good old days, New York was a great place for artists, but maybe not being safe wasn't a great place to build companies. And I call it in my work quality of place. We just did a thing with Mike Bloomberg. We brought 30 mayors from around the world. And to a person, every mayor said, if your city's not safe, not much you can do.
I think what happened in New York was a number of factors coming together at the same time. And I don't think we can discount how important the turnaround of New York City itself was to the whole thing, right?
I asked Dan Gilbert why he's moving to downtown Detroit. He said, those suburbs are really expensive. I can do it more cheaply. New ideas require old buildings. So I'd like you to tell us what you see in terms of this moving map of the New York, the old buildings, what's affordable, where startups. Obviously, a lot's happening in Lower Manhattan, but are there neighborhoods where this is happening more? Are there outer parts that are happening?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to look at where people are living, right? So I do think that the fact that New York has become so safe has allowed people to stay in the 5 boroughs instead of moving to northern Westchester or Connecticut or out to New Jersey. And I mean, I'm just blown away by what's happening in places like Crown Heights. And so what we are seeing in a lot of our companies, so companies that got started in 2005, 10 years later, the founders who started it were in their late 20s, now they're in the late 30s. They all have wives, they all have children, and they're all kind of living in Brooklyn now. They're raising their families there. There's issues about the schools. We better get the public schools in Brooklyn to get better quickly, because we'll have a problem with that. There's not enough private schools, and private schools are expensive. But the housing stock is good. The neighborhoods are safe, and people are moving out there, and there's a lot of development going on. And so now the companies are thinking, well, gee, let's move to Dumbo, let's move to Williamsburg, let's move to Greenpoint, let's move to Gowanus. Right? Let's be near the Barclays Center. Let's be near that big transportation hub in Atlantic Yards.
Question from the audience. What key priority should New York City's next mayor have for the tech industry and the tech economy?
I would say the most important thing that the New York City's next mayor could do for the tech industry is regulatory relief.
Yep.
And I mean, a good example of this is that Uber, Halo, Lyft, Sidecar, it's been really hard for them to operate in New York City. The current administration has, Airbnb is another example of this.
Yep.
The current administration has tried to help as much as they possibly could. That's the right approach. A mayor who's more kind of stuck in the regulatory, system would be, I think, really bad in that way. So that'd be the number one thing I'd say.
I hate to use the word laboratory, because a city is never a laboratory, but I think we are observing one of the most incredible sociological, cultural, economic, and technological transformations I think the world has ever seen. And it's happening right here in our backyard. So Fred, thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you for joining us. We very much appreciate it.